Hey there, sports psych enthusiasts. I'm Dr. Colin Fehr, and I want to share my passion with you. I love talking about ways to unleash the power of the mind. This recording is part of a larger lecture series I've created in an effort to make sports psychology concepts more accessible to a larger audience. The information contained in this series is especially well suited for students of sports psychology and is presented in a way that makes for easy listening for all. Welcome to Sports Psych Concepts. All right, everyone listening, we've got another Sports Psych Concepts lecture for you to listen to today. Communication in sport. And aren't we communicating right now? Here I'm talking to you, you're listening. Communication is the way that we share information, and in sport it's just as important as it is everywhere else. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And so, per usual, my goal is to maybe build on this, share a few things that you're not as familiar with, you may not be as familiar with, at least in this context. Communication is one of those things that when it breaks down, man, we know it breaks down and it causes all sorts of problems. And that's certainly true in the heat of battle, of competition. And so we're going to hit on a few things that I hope will increase your understanding of this, and then maybe leave you with a few practical things to work with moving forward. So to start, I want to just reiterate the obvious point, and that is the importance of communication. And, we could ask this as a rhetorical question, like, well, how important is communication in the context of sport or performance enhancement? And of course, most of you would say, well, it's kind of like the main thing. We could say it's the critical ingredient. We don't have that in there, and we're not going to get there. Think about it in the context of team sports, but even within an individual's own self communication. So, sports psychology, a big concept in that field is self talk. Isn't that communication with the self? And doesn't it make a big difference in confidence and motivation and energy management and all these other things? Isn't that one of those things? Yeah, it is. How do we manage that type of communication? So certainly it's a critical ingredient when we look at coaches communicating with athletes, athletes with other athletes, teammates, with competition, with officials, but also within individuals themselves. And it goes beyond that. The thing about anything in the performance psychology domain is that it's really about life. We use these things, we talk about them in the context of the sport, but they apply well beyond that. And that's especially true for this idea of effective communication and how important it is. We can develop it in sport, and then it can help us beyond that. So, what is the communication process? How might we describe this? Now, this is important, just like other things that I've shared in other lectures. It is indeed a process. It isn't just like an event, a singular event. It's this ongoing thing that there's this back and forth, and there's all these different components of it. And so the main thing I want to share here with you is that there's a lot of things that can get in the way of what is meant by the sender, the person sending the message, and what is heard, what's received on the other end. Now, most of us think maybe we're pretty good at communicating because of our ability to send messages, but we could probably use some help on the receiving side, the listening side of that. Okay, so we have this communication model that I'm going to share with you to think about here, where on one end we have the sender's intentions. Like, this is my intention, what I'm trying to send in this message. So you think about the world of text messaging and online communication. The sender knows what their intent is, but they're the only one that actually knows what that is. And so then they try to encode that in a particular message, the way that they write, and then there's things that can interfere with that, with the encoding. So it could be, well, there's some sort of emotion that they're experiencing in the moment, or in the context of sport, maybe there's fans and there's noise, or there's weather, there's things that can get in the way. There's their intention, There's this, there how they encode things, but then there's noise and interference, and so then there's what they actually do in the moment that's public and observable by anyone. The sender's actions. What did they actually put out there? And then you have the other end of it where you have the listener's style of decoding. How do they decode things? And then what things are getting in their way? Are they having a bad day? They're in a bad mood, or they're getting this message in the context of a noisy environment? It's in the heat of competition. It's practice. It's after practice. What's going on in the sporting world? And then that leads to the actual effect on the listener, which is private and only known to the listener. Okay, so you have all of these things that can get in the way with what the sender actually meant and what was actually received and heard on the other end. Okay, so this is why it's a process, and it's important to understand these things. And I think we intuitively do understand these things. We've all been misunderstood at times. It's like, well, was it what I said, or was it like how it was received? Like, man, well, that doesn't really match up because that wasn't my intent. But maybe I just said it really poorly, or there were these things that got in the way. Like, thank goodness we have emojis for messaging now, written messaging, because it helps understand. We don't have that nonverbal communication. It helps us understand the message, which is a great transition into my next broad topic, which of course is nonverbal communication. Now, there's some great videos online of this. Some of them are kind of comical and funny. You give different examples. Nonverbal communication, the way that people express themselves through body language, is really what we're talking about. And unless we're really self-aware, we've had it pointed out to us, we're often unaware of all of the nonverbal cues that we're using to communicate. And truth be told, most of what we are communicating comes out in our body language as opposed to what it is that we're saying. And so, for example, if our body language betrays what it is that we're saying, it says something different. It's like, oh, hey, how's your day going? Fine. Right? It's like we said it's fine, but then we kind of had a smug look, and then the way that we said it, which is paralanguage, right, is also more influential than what it is that we actually said. And so this is really, really powerful, really, really important to understand. And there's different ways that we can bracket this if we're going to try and characterize nonverbal communication or categorize it rather. So we have physical appearance. Just the way that we look and how we present, that communicates something, whether we like it or not. And, we hear the old adage of don't judge a book by its cover and all of that. And there's certainly a lot of truth to that. And at the same time, we're communicating something. And we are intuitively aware of this. There's status and all sorts of things. I'm part of this group. I'm part of that group. I'm an athlete. I'm not an athlete. It's interesting. I remember being a collegiate athlete, and you always knew the athletes on campus because of the way that they dressed. Like, they dressed like athletes, and it was this very obvious thing. But now, you look at a lot of college campuses, and like, everybody dresses like an athlete. People are wearing athletic wear, walking around like they're athletes, but they're not. It's just kind of the fitness garb, and fashion goes in and out and all of that. But there's statements, right? We're communicating something with that. Our posture, we're communicating with that. Or we have shoulders raised, slumped, heads down, standing upright, or feet crossed, not crossed, or our feet pointing toward another person, pointing away from another person. Like, what is it that's going on? There's messaging coming with that. Those are the sorts of things, man, we're really not always aware of those things. And then we have our gestures. What are we doing with our hands, man? Like, what's going on with that? Pointing in different directions? Are we have more sort of open, welcoming gestures? What types of things are coming with that? What's our body position? So spacing would be an example here. Are we a close talker, getting in someone else's face? That communicates something, whether we say something or not. You see that in competition all the time. You think about the weigh-in and press conference before mixed martial arts fights, or like UFC, right? Ultimate Fight Club competitions, and the fighters will just get right in each other's face, and that spacing, and they just sit there and look and communicate things like this. Intimidation is very primal, very fascinating. Okay, but we're communicating things there. And then there's touch, right? What kinds of touch? How we being physical with our body. Sport is a big, it's ingrained in sport, and how we communicate, our willingness to be physical if we're trying to get a rebound in basketball, or hitting people in contact sports, or there's lots of different examples, but it communicates things and how we touch and the type of touch we use. There's also facial expressions. That's the obvious one. Like, so much of what it is that is we're communicating comes through in that. I mean, you can probably imagine what type of facial expressions I have just by hearing how I'm talking and how intent I am into this. And people go, yeah, I'm energetic, I'm passionate, I like this stuff, it's fun to talk about. So you can imagine those things, but sometimes it's not always evident. It can be harder to tell. We don't get a sense of that. But the messaging that comes off in facial expressions can mask what's really going on, so you can kind of tell if someone's faking it on their face versus if it's authentic. So that's interesting. And then the voice characteristics, that's the paralanguage, right? That tells you a lot. So nonverbal communication, it's really important. We see it in sport. And what does it tell? Like, what is it communicating to our opponents? If we're talking to athletes, like, you're not aware of your body language. How is your body language? You got bad body language? You got good body? How are you holding that together? What are you telling your opponent? Do they know that they got you, right? How can they tell? And you hear examples in sport all the time. Is like the best athletes, it's harder to tell by their body language. It's more difficult to see on the expressions on their face, and how they carry themselves on the competition field or the court. It doesn't, we don't always know, like, are they winning, are they losing? It's hard to know. Lots of great examples like that, because they're nonverbal communication, they have some awareness of it, and they know how to regulate that and use that more intentionally. So fascinating stuff. Now, with that nonverbal communication discussion, I want to shift away and talk a little bit more about the verbal communication. And something I want to present to you that I think is helpful in the sporting context is, especially for coaches who are in a position to tell their athletes. They're coaches. Athletes expect them to tell them what to do, to give them advice, to correct them. Now, there is certainly a place for that, but what I'm going to submit to you for your consideration is that there's this guided discovery, this asking questions approach, where you still can get them there, and there's maybe more lasting effects where you're teaching the athlete how to fish so then they can do it themselves, instead of you just catching the fish and giving it to them, to use the biblical example. Okay, so when we ask questions as opposed to telling them, it shifts the responsibility for learning, which is a key goal of what we want in sport and in competition, those sorts of activities, from the coach to the athlete. And it will increase their awareness of what it is that's going on. What is it we're talking about? What the mistake, for example, for trying to correct a mistake, rather than just telling them, doing this guided discovery process that can help them. And then athletes tend to be more motivated to take action when they can answer those questions. Okay, so it's, hey, what did you notice about that last rep? What was it? What stood out to you? What went well? What can you do better on this next one, right? Rather than telling them. It can be that simple. And that's this guided discovery process that we can work through. That's a really, really helpful way to go about it. Now, there's different models that we can use. So I just kind of gave you a general example, but you could walk through this with it's called the GROW model of communication. GROW is an acronym. And so it's a way that coaches can walk through this process. And basically the G is the goal, right? What do you want? What is it you're wanting to accomplish? What are you working toward? What is it that you wanted to accomplish with that last rep? Like, what do you want to accomplish with this next rep, right? Then there's the R. What's the reality? So G is the goal, R is the reality. Well, where are you at now? What happened on that last one? Okay, in relation. You say this is what you want, this is your goal. Where are you right now in relation to that? Then the O is options. Well, what could you do? What options do you have available? You know where you want to go, you know where you're at now. Now, how might you be able to get there? What options do you have? And then the W is the commitment piece. Well, what will you do next? What are you going to do on this next rep? Okay, we've identified what it is we want. We know what it is we did on the last one, where we are in relation to that. Here's some possible ways to get there. So what is it that you're actually going to do? You see how there's that formula, and so it just shifts it to this guided discovery approach of asking questions instead of just telling. Now, I recognize that and I mentioned this earlier, there's a time and a place to tell the athletes. There's not always time to just work through these steps. But in practice and in situations where there is time, it's going to have more lasting impacts on athletes when we use this sort of general approach rather than just telling our athletes and giving them the answer. So with that, I want to share a few guidelines for sending messages. And really the question here is like, what do we really want to get across in a message that we send? And what might be some tips that we can use to make sure that we are communicating effectively, recognizing that, yeah, there's noise and interference and things can get in the way. So how do we account for that and still communicate the best possible way? So the first concept is to really be direct. Say what you actually mean. We're so good at sugarcoating things and dancing around what it is that we actually mean that we don't say it. And so we have to, sometimes it takes some heart to be able to do that, but being direct is a skill and a really a key guideline for sending messages effectively. We also need to own our message. Okay, so sometimes we tend to we'll defer a message or to responsibility to someone else instead of us taking ownership. So this is the classic sort of I statement thing, like, well, I saw this and this is the effect that it had on me, right? And I would like this, or whatever the different examples you could go through. I'm not going to get too far into that today, but we in addition to being direct, we need to take ownership over a message. We don't deflect to someone else, or the assistant coach said this or whatever, right? My teammate said this. It's like, let's say what we really mean and take ownership over that message. We also want to be complete and specific. Okay, so we're sharing the whole thing and we're not throwing the kitchen sink at the athlete all at once if this is the coach in that direction, or if we're an athlete and we're talking to a teammate and a teammate kind of riles us up, maybe they get on our nerves. It was just a specific thing that happened, but then we're bringing in everything that they've ever done that we didn't say anything in the past or own our message in the past and be direct, and now we're throwing it at them in this particular moment, right? Not the most effective way to go about it. So we also want to be clear and concise. That one's a pretty self-explanatory thing there, right? We don't need this sort of verbal overdose of just saying too much when it's like, well, what was the actual message? What's the parsimonious way? The simplest explanation is usually the best. And so how can we use that in this context? We also need to be able to separate fact from opinion. So just here's my opinion of what's going on. It's like, well, what's the real thing? It's okay to share opinions, obviously, but we want to share those opinions. We want to acknowledge that we're sharing our opinion. Well, this is my perspective. It seems like this is what I saw, versus like, this is what it is that happened, or let's see if we can separate what it is that actually happened versus what did happen. So a lot of times this happens like if the coach doesn't totally see a drill and they're trying to settle a dispute between athletes. It's like, okay, well, our goal is to separate fact from opinion because we didn't see it, so we have to figure out what it is. And sometimes perspectives can betray us on that or not be totally accurate. Okay, and then the last one is to focus on one thing at a time. So this ties back into the whole kitchen sinking idea that I mentioned before. We're not need to throw every little issue in the moment. It's like, let's take one thing at a time, focus on that, and then we move on another thing, and it's going to be much more productive. Okay, so there's your Cliff Notes version of some different guidelines for sending messages that can be helpful on this end of the communication process. Because the other end is the receiving end. So now we shift our attention to listening, but not just listening, active listening, because as we know, there's a difference between just, well, I'm listening and I'm listening to hear what someone is saying, and then I'm listening to understand. And active listening is listening to understand, which is that, I mean, even that's even different than listening to respond, right? We're not listening to respond, we're listening to try and have empathy and connect and have understanding with the other person. And so there's a few keys on this that I want to share with you today. And these are great things to practice because they're not just confined to sports. We can do these anywhere, and then obviously they'll carry over into whatever other domain in life. And active listening really I mean, of all the skills that we can develop in life to help another person feel, accepted, or, or just feel like they're significant, they're a worthwhile person. I mean, there's not much better than active listening. There really isn't. And so a few keys on this: we have to mentally prepare to listen. We have to say, okay, I'm putting the phone down. I'm removing distractions. I'm mentally preparing, like, all right, this is going to involve energy. I'm going to have to exert energy to this to totally be here. It's active listening. It's not passive. It's active, meaning it requires energy. So we have to mentally prepare to exert energy so we can listen properly. Okay, that's very important. We also don't want to mistake hearing for listening. So this is what I was saying before. It's like, oh yeah, I heard you. I kind of joke about this sometimes in my household. It's like, I heard you, I just wasn't listening. Right? The joke on this, like, just because we hear things doesn't mean that we're listening and we're connecting and we're understanding. There's a two-way communication thing, and so we have to be able to show that we're attending to what our the other person is saying, the athlete might be saying. We're asking questions, we're paraphrasing what it is they said, which really is just repackaging it and then giving it back to them and acknowledging what they're saying, responding, giving appropriate feedback, right? Looking at their total communication package, the nonverbal stuff as well as the verbal, and we're capturing those things, acknowledging and connecting and communicating that, right? We do this, and it's so can be so incredibly motivating and encouraging for athletes just to be understood. And man, the credibility, the buy-in, the coachability that you will get from that athlete as a leader, as a coach, is really powerful. This is one of those things that sports psychology practitioners, it's like our wheelhouse. This is what we do. This is what we get paid to do, is to really be exceptional listeners. And so I certainly can speak to the power of this and advocate for it very strongly. Now, one other thing I want to mention that's as part of this active listening component that I just briefly highlighted, but is empathy. Okay, and empathy, it's different than sympathy. Sometimes that gets confused. There's different videos online you can watch that kind of give you different examples. But empathy, essentially, we're putting ourselves in another person's shoes. We're trying to perceive, to recognize, to understand what they're feeling, what their actions, behaviors, intentions, what their attitudes are. Whoever the other person is, the athlete, we're trying to put ourselves in their position. And this is a very important prerequisite to effective communication. It's actually seeing things from their perspective. So, Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People: seek first to understand, then to be understood. And that's getting at this whole empathy thing. Put yourself in their perspective, try and understand. Really see if you can see things from from their point of view by putting yourself in their shoes. Now, it takes a concerted effort to do this on the part of coaches, to see things from their world. And this can be challenging for coaches that are older than the athletes that they're working with, because there can be generational differences. And uh, the empathy can be, it can feel like it requires more effort. Like, I just don't understand how they can be that way. I just don't understand kids these days, these sorts of things, right? It's like, okay, well, then you haven't exercised any empathy to try to understand that, because empathy is the key to understanding those things. And then it unlocks all these other things that we can do in terms of communication and connecting with our athletes. So, a really important thing to try to achieve. Now, one other thing I want to add to this is this caring component. In order to show empathy, like genuine empathy, we have to genuinely care in the first place. And sometimes you hear those the sort of internet quotes out there of, well, an athlete doesn't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And like, that's a kind of a feel good thing, sounds good and everything, but obviously, like, you could care a whole lot but not know diddly squat. So that the knowing does matter. But there is this sort of prerequisite characteristic of this. Like, it's so important that, if athletes don't sense that we care, well, then what are they going to work hard for? You can get them to do stuff, but maybe they're going to resent you for it, and there's not going to be this true connection and this two-way communication. So it's aiming for the ideal. It doesn't mean you need to stop everything that you're doing all the time and just express that you care. There's ways you can build this up and do it intermittently. And obviously there's you want to have continuity there to have that momentum of that. But ultimately what you're trying to do is create a caring climate that's inviting. The athletes want to come into this. They feel like they can communicate. It's safe for them to communicate and share what they're expressing. They feel supported. They feel valued. They feel respected. I think of athletes that I've worked with where I've had plenty of athletes that I didn't disagree with, or that I did disagree with, and tried to create an environment where we could talk anyways. Like, I realize that there's disagreement here, and I'm okay with that. We can talk about those things and we can work through that. You can have that as an athlete, and then we're still going to try and work together to determine how we're best going to move forward. And the caring, having that genuine sort of unconditional positive regard, to bring the sort of therapeutic term in here, is really helpful. So we've identified some things that are helpful and positive and constructive on the other end, but what does a breakdown in communication look like? Like, how might we describe this? And really, it's quite simple. I mean, there's two ends of it. It can be on the sending end, where there's just a poorly transmitted message because it's just ambiguity, it's not clear, there's some inconsistency, we're sending mixed messages, those sorts of things. Like, it can be on that end, but it also can be just on the receiving end, where the listener is just not listening carefully, and so they're misinterpreting what's going on. They're not paying attention, or they have a tendency to evaluate or judge the communication, right? Because they're listening to respond, they're listening to provide advice, to try and solve problems, instead of listening again to understand. Now, this obviously can lead to a lack of trust between people who are trying to communicate. If they're not sending great messages, messages aren't being received, which, wherever the breakdown is going to lead to a lack of trust, right? Is that the communication isn't great. And the thing I want to mention on this is that sometimes these differences can be just because of socialization. It can be because of uh, heredity, or like family dynamics, upbringing, and how one person communicates is because of, it's just the predominant way that communication happened in their family, but then that really doesn't jive with the way a teammate communicated in their family and their upbringing, and so then it can cause these misinterpretations. You can have one athlete that's kind of joking in a playful way, teasing another athlete. It's just a way that they get along. It's how it was in their family. Other teams have been on, and this other athlete's never experienced that before, and so they think they're getting bullied, when it's the intent is not that at all, but then it can lead to something that is perceived to be that serious. And so we have to understand these things as well. There's a lot that can lead to breakdowns of communication. We've all experienced these things. It happens all the time. Even if we think that we're good communicators, we're still not perfect. And so the point in mentioning this is that humility is important. We're human, and we can work toward that perfection and strive for that, but recognize that we're not there, and there's a lot of things that can come into play. And so when we adopt that perspective, it tends to improve our communication. So with that as the backdrop, I want to share a few more tips for you on how to improve communication. And I'm just going to make this brief. There's different models out there. There's whole books that you can read on this. A Crucial Conversations book is a great one on their formula that they have. There's other things that have acronyms that can help you remember what it is to do. So I'll just share a few tips. And the first one is just to know your style, to understand how you communicate, so your self-awareness. And in order to do this, it can be helpful to get some feedback from trusted individuals who will give you genuine feedback, and they know how you communicate, how your tendency is, how you tend to be received, how you come across with your nonverbal communication and the approach to all of it. I mean, I've had people say that they think I'm an arrogant, braggadocious sort of dude, and had other people think that I'm just this gregarious sort of extrovert, fun-loving, energetic, passionate guy, and then others that think I'm a quiet, introverted, very sort of analytical type on the other end. So it's interesting because like, well, what is my actual style if I have that whole range of things? And context can matter with that as well, right? The context and the environment that we're in can affect this. But the more feedback we get, it can help us understand that about ourselves, and we can try and improve our communication in ways that might be necessary. So ways we can do that, we can get some training. Like I said, there's tons of materials online. You could get coaching through artificial intelligence these days on how to respond messages, how to structure things and do that like that. I mean, that just could be some generic thing. I know there's different classes that can be taken, and both online and in person. And so learning some techniques that could be helpful. So I just think of, there's lots of classic great books out there. How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, the Crucial Conversations book, right? There's all of these different things out there that have formulas that we can play around with to help us get better at communicating. It's just exerting a little bit of energy in that direction to do that. Now, we also can use multiple methods of communication. So, I mean, we have face-to-face, we have written, we have electronic, where we can record audio, just like I'm doing right here. It's all very amazing what it is that we can do. And so that can help us. Some of us, maybe we're better at the written or we're better at the verbal, whatever the context is, some sort of combination of how we do better in different contexts again. But a way to improve overall is just to explore all those different things. What ways can we improve? And then it's practice, practice, practice. Put yourselves in positions to do it and to do those things. I think about, the amount of writing, for example, that I do every day is maybe astonishing, what some people might consider. And I'm not even like, don't consider yourself a writer necessarily, compared to someone who would say they are a writer, or they're a full-time researcher that writes grants and writes papers and does all of that stuff. It's not even that. I know the amount of writing I do is incredible. So you develop a skill doing that, and then the presenting, the oral presenting. You spend time doing it, and you get better and better. So a great way to sort of practice what we preach in terms of with our athletes, they need to practice. Hey, we want to get better communication. We need to practice. All right, so I want to shift now again, because I mentioned, one of the ways to improve our communication is to know what our communication style is. And so I'm going to share some examples of different communication styles. And, I encourage you to think about which style might be your general approach. And just, having this understanding can help us say, all right, well, maybe that's my tendency, but how can I maybe use some of these other ones depending on what the situation calls for? Because really, you think about the best communicators, they know how to adapt. So the first one to mention here is a competing or dominating communication style. So this is, believe it or not, it sounds like maybe it's not a great approach to use, but there's times when it's appropriate, when we need to take decisive action, for example, and the best outcome is sought for the person making the decision. That's what the person's doing. They're trying to figure out what is going to be best for them, and so they're kind of competing with the other person or the other party, whoever they're communicating with. So that's one style. And you have the collaborating style, or sort of an integrative style, where both groups are trying to work together to make positive contributions to solve whatever problem it is that they're faced with. Okay, so there can be certain situations where maybe that would make sense. And then we have a compromising style. So this one's going to be effective if you don't really have a lot of time. You need to make a quick solution, or at least some sort of interim step toward solving something that's a little bit more complex. So it's maybe not the ideal for anybody involved, but it's a step in that direction. Or at least it's tabling an issue for later could be part of that. Then we have an accommodating style, where people, they look at the relationship with the other person as more important than satisfying what might their own what their own needs might be. Okay, so it's just like, all right, well, I'll just do whatever you want because, I don't want you to be mad at me. And so then they cave, right? That's another way I think about that one, is they tend to cave more. Like they might compete for a little while, try and collaborate for a little while, more likely to compromise or just accommodate and say, well, just, you can have what it is that you want. Now, there's situations again where maybe that would be appropriate if it's something where, the outcome doesn't really matter that much to me. So let's just do what you want to do. I don't really care. And then we have avoiding. So someone's just either ignoring the conflict, or they're hoping it goes away, or it's some deliberate strategy to control the situation, right? They're trying to control the other person, get the other person upset at them, and so they're just avoiding the conversation to hold the other person hostage. So that maybe is not also super effective either. Okay, but maybe there's situations where you could justify using that. Perhaps we could go through all of them and come up with different examples. But so each of us are going to have a tendency to use one of these styles, depending on the context and the situation, but there may be more one overarching sort of approach that we use, and it's important to understand that, right? And this is just one way to look at these. There's probably other ways that you could characterize communication styles, but I hope that is helpful. Now, the final thing I want to share with you today in this recording is the classic sandwich approach to providing feedback. And I imagine maybe you've heard of it before, but it's just kind of, it's a useful tool. It's a useful tool that we can use as long as we use it appropriately, because there are ways that we can use this, improperly if we're using hollow sort of positive statements. But essentially, you have some sort of, if you're a coach and you're giving feedback to an athlete, they executed a repetition, they come to you for feedback. We use a sandwich approach. We give them some sort of positive statement about what they did well, then some future-oriented instruction about what they can do better the next time in the future with the technical piece that maybe is more critical of what it is that they did, provides more of a critique. And then you have some sort of compliment, some sort of positive thing on the other end, right? Where it's just like, okay, you got this. I love the effort, what it is that you're doing, right? There's so many different ways or combinations that you could put together there. But it's a useful tool, right? It's a useful tool because it gives us some structure around how to communicate. And at first, when we play around with this, it takes more intentionality, because we don't want to just give that hollow praise on anything if they're like, well, they didn't do anything right. It's like, well, find something positive to say and then give them the instruction and then give them some encouragement to go and do it. You got this, right? You can do this. I believe in you, whatever at the end. So then they go and that's the last thing that they hear, and they're carrying that with them. So simple, but really effective. Wanted to end that with you. Maybe it's because I'm hungry and I want to go eat a sandwich. But that's all I have for this recording. I hope it's helpful for you to think about some of these communication principles. And per usual, hopefully you learn some things and things that you can use in the future. So thanks for being here. Thank you for listening to this recording. I hope you learned something about sports psych, perhaps something you didn't know before, and maybe even something you can apply in your life more generally. If you liked what you heard, feel free to share this presentation with others who might be interested. And if you're interested in more content like this, visit my website at fairadvantage.com, or visit the Fehr Advantage channel on YouTube, or find the Fehr Advantage podcast on Spotify.